a half an hour of Q&A time planned, Laura. Thank you for joining us.
Chair, excuse me, Tom, did you have a question? You had your hand raised.
Does he?
You did.
I just wanted to say before we start the departmental presentations, I'm really specifically interested in hearing from all the department heads about the service impacts of their reductions. Who in the community is affected and how? So that
okay, thank you, Tom. Yeah, thank you, Gary. Okay, Laura, I think we're ready to proceed.
Okay, good morning, commissioners and budget committee members. I'm happy to be here this morning to discuss and present the Business and Community Services budget for fiscal year 2021. As mentioned, my name is Laura Zettner and I'm the Director of Business and Community Services. And with me is Sarah Ekman, the Deputy Director, and then Tracy Graham-Bush, who's our Financial Analyst. And they'll be assisting with answering questions and moving the slides forward. So normally I would be doing this in person, but that's not happening this year. So I do want to take a moment to introduce our leadership team who's out in Zoom world watching. We have Lori Bothwell, our Executive Director of the Fair and Event Center, Catherine Cole, our Library Network Director, Mitzi Olson, the Director of the Gladstone and Oak Lodge Libraries. We have Rick Grun, our County Parks and Forest Manager. He also manages property disposition. And then I have Gordon Tolbert. He's the owner of Total Golf Management, and he manages and operates the Stone Creek Golf Course for us. And then Scott Archer, the Director of North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. Next slide, please. So BCS is a really big department, and so the revenue and expenditure graphs are very rolled up. So I'm going to just provide some big picture comments here. We have overall 77 FTE and over 200 part-time and seasonal staff. And if you take out we have two special districts, the North Clackamas Parks and Rec District and the Library District. If you take those out, we have 41.5 full-time FTE. Our total budget is over 90 million for all of our divisions, including the special districts. If you take out those, it's about 35 million. So we'll be talking about the $35 million today. We have 7 lines of business and 20 programs. And I want to talk a moment about our financial guidelines because they're really important because we're so dependent on fees and charges and have been significantly impacted by COVID-19. It's really important to talk about those guidelines because they are what is going to get us through this. So we manage our finances very tightly and very prudently. And so again, I want to talk about the financial guidelines that we use. We do monthly reporting, we do quarterly reporting, and we do 5-year forecasting. For the quarterly reporting, we do budget to actual comparisons. And then on the 5-year forecasting, of course, we're looking out 5 years to see what those trends are. This gives managers advanced indicators of potential revenue shortages and expenditure overages so that we could have time to react and change course. And it also helps to ensure compliance with Oregon budget law. We also have what we call an emergency contingency, which is consistent with the county policy. But so what we do is we have an operating fund balance, and we like to see all of our divisions at between 10 and 15% of operating expenditures. So what you have there is if you had $1 million budget and you did the 10% of operating expenditures, you'd have $100,000 that you'd set aside in contingency. And that is for unexpected expenditures that you could not have known about at the time you prepared your budget. COVID-19 is a perfect example of that. So again, the guidelines that we have in place are what are going to get us through this. We have all BCS divisions recognize the beginning fund balance as a one-time non-reoccurring resource. So to the extent feasible, one-time resources are applied to one-time expenditures. We also look every single year at our ongoing revenues, so our reoccurring revenues, and we make sure that those are balanced with our reoccurring expenditures. And if you used an example of your own household, you would take your monthly salary, that would be your ongoing revenue, and your expenses would be your mortgage, your car payment, your utilities. You want those to be balanced. So that may sound simple and common sense, but a lot of governmental entities don't do that. And so That's one of the really important things that we do and monitor on an ongoing basis. And then finally, I'll mention we maintain our infrastructure, and we do not like to defer maintenance of our infrastructure. So what we do is we inventory our assets, and we systematically set aside dollars on an annual basis so that we can repair assets as they age over time. And an example of this would be you have a $50,000 vehicle, you have a 5-year life, you would set aside $10,000 a year for 5 years so that in the 5th year you could replace that vehicle. So those are just some of the guidelines I wanted to point out, because these guidelines are what is going to help us get through COVID. And you can see in the graph in front of you that we have a large fund balance. That's why. It's contingency, it's reserves set aside to take care of our assets. And again, it's going to get us through this COVID situation. Next slide, please. So again, here, this is so rolled up, it's hard to talk about our budget rolled up like this, but I'll just highlight a couple of things here. If you look at overall revenues, they went up $789,000, 4.2% increase. If you look at overall expenditures, they went up $141,000. So that's a really small increase on a $35 million budget, so 0.6% increase. So our budget pretty much is a status quo budget for this year. Next slide, please. So this actually breaks out our department by fund, which is a little easier to talk about. So I want to talk a little bit about revenues and how we're funded here. So the county fair fund has 2 programs, the fair and the rodeo. And we are funded by fees and transient room tax in the amount of $500,000. So that's the main funding source here. And I believe there was actually a question that came up about the fair. And I want to answer that here. So that the fair and rodeo was actually canceled after the budget was prepared for 2021. So therefore the numbers in the budget don't reflect what actually will happen. So Lori Bothwell, the executive director, has been working on reforecasting. And once all those numbers are complete, we will need to do a supplemental budget for that. And I know that she's also been working on furloughs, and they've got staff that are rotating weeks, and they're also not hiring any part-time or temporary staff. So hopefully that will answer that question from the budget committee member. The next fund we have is our Economic Development Fund, and we have 2 programs there. We have the Land Bank Authority and the Economic Development Program. This is funded by lottery dollars, and we get about $1.7 to $1.8 million annually, and those dollars are restricted by statute to fund economic development activities that are related to job creation. Next is our library fund, and we have 3 programs here. We have the Oak Lodge and the Gladstone Library, and we also have our library network. The Oak Lodge and the Gladstone Library is funded by the Library District of Clackamas County, and I presented that budget yesterday, so it's funded by property tax. And then the Library Network is our only division that's completely funded by the County General Fund, and you'll see in the yellow column the $2.3 million of the general fund support for the Library Network. And then we have our County Parks Fund, which is funded by fees. We have camping fees, RV fees. We operate the Boones Ferry Marina on a lease, and we get about $200,000 per year there. We have grants, and then we also have Stone Creek Golf Course net revenue that assists with county parks funding. And then we have our Property Disposition Fund, which is our tax foreclosed properties in Clackamas County. That's funded by auction proceeds. Our Forest Management Fund is funded by the annual timber revenue from annual timber sales. And then we have our Dump Stoppers program, which is part of this fund, which is funded by U.S. Forest Service and BLM grants. And then finally, our Stone Creek Golf Course Fund is funded by food and beverage, green fees, cart fees, and pro shop fees. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about Performance Clackamas. BCS, along with many other departments, completely revamped our performance measures. We went through corporate review in January 2020, where everything was vetted by leadership. And so therefore, you're going to see a lot of new measures here with not a lot of data. So I won't spend a whole bunch of time on that. But let me just start with BCS administration. The line of business there has 2 programs, Office of the Director and Financial Management Analysis. What we do here is we provide leadership, strategic planning, communication, budgeting, financial management, HR, risk, and procurement support to our BCS divisions. And what we like to say is we provide the internal service to our divisions so that they can spend their time providing service directly to the residents of Clackamas County. And the performance measure here that we looked at was our percent of departmental strategic results achieved, and we have a target of 70%. You can see in 18-19 we were at 59%, and that ties to the BCC priority of the county's budget will be 100% tied to results with transparency to the public. Next slide, please. So this is our county fair line of business, and we have 2 programs here. We have the county fair and rodeo, and then the event center. And this is just some information on the fair, a 49-acre facility. It's owned by the county, and it's operated and managed by the Fair and Event Center Board. And I just want to note that the Clackamas County Fair employees are actually not Clackamas County employees, so this is all operated by statute, so there's some unique things here. The annual county fair and rodeo is in August of each year. We would have had our 113th fair this year, however, that was canceled. The event center, we have over 830 events that happen throughout the rest of the year held at the event center. And activities include things such as meetings, parties, weddings, the spring garden show, the RV show, and we had the Hair Fest music festival scheduled for this year, and that was postponed due to COVID-19. The performance measure here that we're looking at is survey respondents who agree or strongly agree that Clackamas County Fair met their expectation. Again, this ties to the BCC goal that it will be tied to 100% of results with transparency to the public. Next slide, please. So economic development line of business, we have 2 programs here. We have the economic development program and then the land bank authority. And so I'll talk about economic development first. The goal here is to create living wage jobs in Clackamas County through programs related to business retention, business expansion, relocation of existing businesses, and recruitment of new businesses, as well as providing business assistance. So changes for the upcoming year that I want to highlight is we're going to be doing a strategic plan to refocus our efforts to better align with BCC goals, in particular those goals related to employers within targeted clusters, reporting that an adequately trained workforce is available to fill family wage jobs. So we're going to be partnering with CCC on that to assist with providing programs and apprenticeship classes to ensure that we have an adequately trained workforce. The performance measure here that we look at is the dollars invested in the enterprise zones, as well as the number of new jobs created in the enterprise zones. And you can see we have a target of $9 million for 2021 and 60 jobs. And then those tie fairly nicely to the BCC priorities. I'm going to talk a little bit about, next slide, please. The Land Bank Authority next. And there was a question from one of the budget committee members here, so I'm going to expand a little bit just to make sure I get that question answered. The Land Bank Authority was authorized by the state in 2015, and it allows entities to take in brownfield properties without the typical liabilities associated with brownfields. The primary role of the Clackamas County Land Bank Authority would be to acquire, remediate, and position brownfield properties for future development, and to increase the supply of employment lands and or affordable housing within the county. Brownfield properties, once cleaned up, can be very valuable in that they are often located in urban areas where the infrastructure is already in place. The county received a grant from Business Oregon Brownfield Fund to create a business plan, which we did. That was completed in 2019. And then following the completion of that business plan, we submitted another grant through the Oregon Strategic Reserve Fund, and we received a $300,000, which was to help us to get the Land Bank Authority up and running. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, this has been put on hold, and we are working with the state to get an extension. And they're saying right now that they think we can have a 2-year extension. So I'm excited about that. But I'm not going to go into the measures here just because of the time limit, and then also it's been put on hold. So next slide here, please. So the library line of business has the Oak Lodge and Gladstone libraries, and then also the library support services, which is called the library network. And I'm just going to focus here on the big project that we have going with the Oak Lodge and the Gladstone Library. So based on a settlement agreement between the city of Gladstone and Clackamas County, the county is in the master planning process to build a 6,000 square foot library in Gladstone and a 19,500 square foot library in Oak Lodge, possibly on the site of the NSPRD-owned Concord School property. A citizen task force has been established and charged with recommending the best future use of the Concord property and evaluating the sustainability of the Concord property as both an NSPRD community center and a park and a potential site for the new Oak Lodge Library. Another important point here is that in December of 2019, City of Gladstone transferred their library staff and all their operations for the Gladstone Library to the county. So the Oak Lodge and Gladstone libraries will be operated under a 1 library, 2 building model, sharing staff and resources to realize operational efficiencies and to achieve economies of scale. And the measure here that we're looking at is the % of youth signed up for summer reading programs who complete the program. And this ties nicely to the BCC goal of ensuring safe, healthy, and secure communities. We know that when kids use libraries, they develop strong early literacy skills and improve their later academic success and occupational achievement. Next slide, please. So here we have the county parks and golf line of business, and this includes both county parks and Stone Creek. Just some background information. We have 19 park sites in our Clackamas County system. We have 201 campsites, 13 restrooms, 7 caretaker facilities, a 96 slip boat marina, that's Boone's Ferry Marina, 7 boat launches, 1,000 acres of parkland, and 180 acres of mowed turf. And one big thing I want to point out here is that we had a backlog of deferred maintenance of over $4 million. And that was a few years ago. And that is now below $2 million. And that's again because of those financial guidelines that we have. So I just wanted to point that out. The performance measure here that I wanted to highlight was the % occupancy of campgrounds. So we have peak and we have non-peak. And the peak is Friday and Saturday, and you can see we have a target of 90% during peak and 50%, which is on off-peak. And you can also see the projected performance due to COVID-19, we were shut down, so those numbers are much lower than anticipated. And that ties to the Clackamas County priority of to honor, utilize, promote, and invest in our natural resources. And I also want to just talk real quickly about Stone Creek here. It's a 120-acre facility with old growth Douglas fir lakes and 4 wetlands. If you haven't been out there, it's absolutely beautiful. We have 43 bunkers. It's International Audubon Sanctuary certified, and we have a contract with Total Golf Management and Gordon Tolbert, who manages, operates, and maintains the course and does a fantastic job on that. We have net revenue that off the golf course between $100,000 and $300,000 per year that goes to assist county parks, and that number has actually been decreasing due to the increase in the minimum wage. Next slide, please. So this is the assets line of business. This includes our forestry program and our property disposition program. And just, I always like to put out some good facts. Clackamas County is 1.2 million acres. It's about 80% forest land, 51% is U.S. Forest Service and BLM land, and the county actually owns 3,200 acres of forests. So we have a goal of having healthy forests that produce timber on a sustainable level, protect natural resources, and contribute to jobs in rural communities. We currently harvest between 40 and 50 acres annually on a 55 to 65 year rotation, which generates revenue to, again, help pay for our county parks program and helps pay for our capital asset repair and replacement program. Each harvest is approximately 1.4 million board feet. And just so you have some frame of reference there, that's 14 train cars full of lumber. And I had to have our county forest manager give me something that would make sense there. So that's what the numbers that I use. I always say train cars full of lumber. The performance measure here that we looked at was the percentage of young stands actively managed, and we have a new measure here of 20% target. And by that, this ties to the BCC goal of by 2022, a climate action plan is adopted for our community with specific recommendations to reach being carbon neutral by 2050. And I do want to mention here that we are working currently, and we've done some initial feasibility analysis about enrolling portions of the county's 3,200 acres of forest land into a voluntary carbon program to help meet climate change goals for carbon sequestration and carbon capture credit. So just wanted to highlight that there. Next slide, please. So we are on the major accomplishments, and I don't actually have time to go through all of these, so I'm just going to highlight a couple. I do want to highlight the Souder Timber CLT facility. BLT, together with the city of Estacada and the state of Oregon, successfully recruited Souder Timber. It's a CLT, cross-laminated timber company, and to purchase 5 acres, and they are going to be opening their plant in 2020, and they'll bring in 25 family wage jobs. So really wanted to highlight that. That was a huge success. And then I've already talked about the Land Bank Authority. Next slide, please. I want to make sure I keep on time. I think I mentioned that we diverted $500,000 from our Land Bank Authority, and what we did was we took the money to set up a COVID-19 business support package. We created a Who's Open tool to help open businesses promote themselves in the community. And we also have a technical and financial assistance package through Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon that will provide technical assistance to between 35 and 45 businesses in the county, as well as $200,000 in grants ranging from $2,500 to $12,500, which will assist during this COVID crisis. And then we also are going to be working with CCC to help with workforce assistance due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. And just real quick, I'll mention the library of things here. Sorry, that was my dog. Business and Community Services staff in partnership with Clackamas County Sustainability and Solid Waste implemented something called a Library of Things in 9 of the 13 libraries in the county. And you can go and you can actually check out things like a guitar or a crock pot or a sewing machine. So it's a really cool thing that is up and running now in Clackamas County in our libraries. Next slide, please. Oak Lodge and Gladstone Libraries, I already talked about this. One thing I will highlight here is that construction on the libraries is estimated to begin in February of 2020, so we're really excited about that. We expect to complete the master plan probably in October, and then we'll enter the design, development, schematic design, and then construction document phase. So we're real excited about that. Next slide, please. County Parks, Forest, and Property Disposition. Just want to highlight real quickly that we have a new lease with River City Boats. This is really exciting. We were able to double our lease revenue here from $100,000 to $200,000. Again, very excited about that. For Dump Stoppers program, I want to highlight that we removed 60,000 pounds of solid waste that went to the transfer station, and that was from 40 illegal dump sites. And then finally, for our property disposition program, which is our tax foreclosed property program, we were able to put 30 properties back on the tax rolls. So that's really exciting. Next slide, please. And then even though today we're not talking about NCPRD, we talked about them yesterday, I do want to highlight 2 big accomplishments here. because we worked spent so much time working on them. The NSPRD lawsuit has been settled, and this will allow both parties to turn the page and focus on building new parks and providing great recreation programs to our residents. Happy Valley will be leaving the district effective July 1. And then also we paid off all of our debt for North Clackamas Parks and Rec District. And so they are debt free for the first time in the history of the district. So that's pretty cool. Next slide, please. And what I did here was just real quickly under significant changes or other issues, went through and just talked about how COVID-19 has impacted each of our divisions. And we were significantly impacted in every division. For economic development, this is funded by video lottery, so that revenue has been significantly impacted with the closures due to COVID-19. So we'll be working with the state to determine the impact there, and it may impact our business community, including recruitment, retention, and expansion. I already mentioned that we diverted $500,000 from the lottery for a business recovery plan. I already talked about that. So next slide, please. On the libraries, currently the Oak Lodge, actually all the libraries in Clackamas County are closed due to COVID-19. During phase 1, what we plan to do is to allow non-contact distribution of reserved materials and continuation of virtual services. And during phase 2 is when we plan to start opening up the libraries. We are going to be monitoring our property taxes very, very closely. What we're doing already is taking the property taxes each month and looking a year ago at the same time and just making sure we're monitoring what's happening. We know we're going to be impacted and we will adjust accordingly. On the library network, they are also closed, and they are currently working with the library directors group to draft a consistent opening plan for all the libraries in the county. For NSPRD, all the building facilities and programs are closed due to COVID, other than Meals on Wheels. There's been a huge uptick in the demand for Meals on Wheels. All parks and walking trails are open. However, play structures and shelters are still closed. We know there's going to be a huge impact here. Again, we're going to monitor and we will adjust accordingly, but the financial guidelines that we have in place are really going to get us through this. Next slide, please. So county parks and forest, county, we closed all of our facilities on March 18th. We delayed hiring of all of our staff. I'm happy to report that on June 1st, our day use and all of our boat ramps are going to open. And then on June 22nd, our campgrounds are going to open, of course, with a lot of work that we've done regarding COVID-19 to ensure that we keep all the patrons safe. Stone Creek Golf Course closed on March 18th, and happy to report there that they opened on May 1st, only for the golf, driving range, and carts. We're going to be looking next to open the food and beverage just for takeout only, but they are up and running. So happy to report that. And they actually applied for, because they're a private entity, applied for the PPP and did receive funding there. So we think we should be fine there. Property disposition, we canceled our public auction, and we'll monitor any impact there. County Fair and Event Center was closed and is still closed. And again, I think I've answered the question on that. The fair and rodeo was closed, and we will monitor the revenue and expenses and adjust accordingly to ensure that we have a balanced budget. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. We're to the end. So I hope I stayed within my half an hour, and I'm ready to answer questions along with Tracy and Sarah.
Thank you, Laura, very much. Yeah, I think that I appreciate that you were concise in your presentation. And to my knowledge, all the questions that we had asked ahead of time were answered in that. So I'll turn it over to Drenda, because I know both myself and a couple others have questions at the moment. So I'll let her facilitate that. Thank you, Drenda.
We have Commissioner Slavis and then Chair Parks.
Yeah, so I thought we were going to hit tab 2, but we just jumped to tab 3. So my question's going to go back to Laura, but it's going to be based off a couple questions I have on tab 2. So in tab 2, page 4, the top left graph indicates that there's a gap between our expenditures and our revenues. And Elizabeth, I think last week or the week before, you indicated that our funding gap to make it sustainable is about a $9 million. Is that correct?
Well, I was looking at over the next 3 years, 3 to 4 years in the forecast.
Okay. So that gap that's displayed on the graph on page 4 is about how much?
I'm sorry, I got a garbage truck behind me. What, on which page 4? Laura, is that on your document?
I don't,
Tab,
that's what I'm trying to figure out. Which is it, Sarah, can you flip to the second and third slide?
So this is not your presentation, Laura. It's tab 2 of the budget book, the budget reviewer notes for the budget committee.
right. So yeah, it's a question for Laura, but it's gonna be based off the answer that I get from this question based on tab 4. I thought we were gonna cover tab 2. I thought we were gonna cover tab 2 this morning. But so Elizabeth, yeah, tab 2, page 4, top left graph. What approximately is that gap?
That gap is reflecting the entire county's total budget, and it represents the beginning balance that we're utilizing. So if you go to the page above, and for everyone, this is the reviewer's guide, which is on the website next to, it's the button next to the budget message. There is a full Clackamas County budget overview. And on page 3 is reflective of the beginning balances, all the resources and requirements, and a full balanced budget for the county. And you'll see at the beginning balance for 2021 is $200 million is our beginning balance. And that is the gap that you see on the top left graph, page 4. The spread between the revenues and expenditures. And when we look at the budget is for 1 year, and our forecast is a 5-year projection. So we always include the beginning balance when we're looking at a complete budget, and then the differences are kept in our reserves and contingencies, as we discussed earlier in this conversation during the budget message presentation. And as practice, you know, we typically have not spent 100%, so we utilize funds in our reserves for those beginning balances for the next year, because we always want to carry funds over.
Okay, so that that gap, if I look at the bottom of page 3, I see the minus $5,043,296. So that, I'm just wondering if that 5 million minus 5 of general fund is reflective of that graph, that gap.
I'm looking quickly here to find the 5 million. Where's
bottom of page 3,
Page 3,
purple.
page 3, second from the end column. Bottom, general fund support.
No fund
Is that what you're talking about, Paul?
Yes, says, yeah.
oh, that, the general fund support.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I have the updated, because that general fund support is, I apologize to those that are pulling on the website. We did update the website presentation of the preview guide, because that that general fund support line that you're looking at, that's what is transferred out of the general fund to departments and funds that are outside of the general fund, which really doesn't relate to this picture. So it's, I apologize for that. Let's see, the conflicting information it gives, it's really that line in the purple is just to demonstrate what general fund is going out to other departments.
Yeah, I guess maybe a better way then, if those aren't accurate, just trying to establish what the funding gap is. Let's say for general fund support, because Laura's department is general fund, partially general fund supported. So I'm trying to get just an estimate of what that funding gap is for general fund that we're short this year.
Is that question for me, or
Well, no, the question's for Elizabeth, and then what I'm going to take, let's just say that Elizabeth said that number's $5 million short. I'm going to ask Laura and every other department that's general fund supported, what can, of the 5 and 10 and 15% cuts that the administrator asked you for, what cuts did you take and what cuts can you take to help close that gap?
So I can answer. So we cut, I believe, $245,000 out of our library network, and that was actually the contingency that we had held in our fund, and that's now over in the county general fund. The thing about the library network, though, is we have an intergovernmental agreement with 12 cities in 11 or 12 cities in Clackamas County, which dictates the service that we provide. So we're kind of locked in on funding there, and really, I would say that would not be a division that could take cuts just based on that the agreement that we have with 12 cities for library network, and that's basically all of our funding that we have from the county general fund.
You're on mute, Paul.
In the interest of time, I'll keep this to one question. So on, as a result of the hiring freeze that was implemented 12 months ago, how many new hires did your department make in the last 12 months?
Our FTEs are down 3. If you look at the FTEs, I think it went from 44.5 to 40, either 43 or down to 41.
Well,
so
did you actually cut actual FTEs or did you actually cut vacant FTEs? My question is how many new hires, just a simple question, how many new hires did your department make in the last 12 months?
We don't have any new hires. In fact, we have one that was a limited term 3-year position, which we are actually ending on June 30th. So that's a real person in a position that we're going away.
Okay, maybe Chair, if we can at some point in time, just go over some tab 2. It's not fair to Laura or Laura's presentation to get bogged down in something I thought we would cover in advance.
Okay, can we make a note through staff to, after we go through the department budgets, to come back to tab 2 and then see if there are any further questions at that time on tab 2?
Yes.
We're good with that? Okay, thank you.
Chair Parks?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, Laura, a big thank you to the department for all the on the ground work that you're doing for economic development, especially when we consider the jobs loss for COVID-19 and how businesses are so affected by that. So I was really gratified to see in the budget book the kinds of steps that you were taking to help mitigate those particular issues. And so that answered a lot of my questions. So I appreciate that. And I just, as curiosity, I wondered, I wondered how the Who's Open web is doing. And then also I want to be sure and thank you for the information that you provided on land banking, because I think a lot of the general public doesn't understand the importance of that. So I appreciate that. So thank you. That was very, very good presentation. But I do wonder how the Who's Open is doing and if everybody's familiar with that.
Why don't we have Sarah? She's been monitoring that very closely with economic development staff. Could you answer that, Sarah, please?
Certainly. Good morning. I can send a quick note to our GIS expert to get some exact numbers for this morning on the Who's Open app and share those probably in a matter of minutes. Generally, it's doing well. I know there were over 300, I believe closer to 400 registrations, and Public and Government Affairs is preparing to do another push of information out to the community to encourage businesses to register. Because of course, when we send out targeted information to the community, we see an influx of registrations and then the numbers kind of slow down. And so they're preparing to do another outreach coordinated with our Emergency Operations Center for this coming week. So I will see if I can get a revised number from GIS to see what those current stats are for today.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. And, maybe you could just send that by email or something out to all the budget committee members. We probably don't have to take any more budget time, online time for
Absolutely.
that. So I appreciate that. I also see that we have a few more folks with questions, and we do have a little bit of time to be able to answer those, but let's make sure again that the questions are really relevant. They are specific, to the point, and not redundant. We have a lot of information to get through over the next 2 days, and I have a sense that we're going to need a little bit longer to do that. So make sure you do have Friday on your schedules, because I would be hard pressed to think that we would be completed by then. We don't have public hearing until Thursday evening, so we know we don't want to make any final decisions until after that anyhow. So with that, I will turn it back over to Drenda to call on the peoples whose hands are raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Feely?
Thank you. Good presentation, Laura. It always amazes me how many things your department does. I think I made the same comment last year, but I want to applaud you on your financial policies. I mean, when you say you use one-time revenue for one-time expenditures, I mean, that is a sort of model practice. And I think it's something I've recommended the county adopt countywide. And when you talk about replacement of fixed assets or just assets in general, another good financial policy. So I'm wondering, can you provide me with a copy of your financial policies? Because that's something I really want to bring up in the context of the countywide budget committee. Because I think, we're talking about sustainable budget, and the only way once we get there that we're going to stay there is to have financial policies like that don't allow us to go down the rabbit hole in the future. So.
Yes, I can absolutely do that. And I just want to say that I am 100% behind Gary's one county solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Elizabeth, as our new interim director, is working on guidelines. She hasn't been here long enough to get those in place.
Right.
But I definitely think that together we can adjust ours to be in alignment with the counties. And I wanted to just mention ours because they really are what is going to get us through COVID-19 without having to rely on the county general fund. So again, thank you for your comments. I will get those financial
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Lee?
I'm just going to have a quick question. During the presentation, you mentioned the economic development have provide grants to help with small business during COVID-19. And so did BCS receive any funding from other agency, or where those funding coming from?
Sarah, do you want to go ahead and explain the grant that we applied for from the state, and then also the funding that we're using?
Certainly. So we did dedicate, Laura mentioned we diverted $500,000 that was previously dedicated for the Land Bank Authority over for the program to assist small businesses. So $200,000 of that will be used for grants, and the Board of County Commissioners approved our agreement for a outside party, which is Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, to facilitate that program. That approval was last Thursday, so we're moving forward on that. And then we also did apply, the state of Oregon released a matching funds opportunity for emergency business assistance. And we applied for that and are still waiting to hear. So our ask to the state was for an additional $200,000. And we, in order to be eligible for that, had to have a program that aligned with the guidance from the state. And so we reworked our program a bit from what we had originally anticipated to ensure that we would be eligible for those matching funds. So I know the state had, I think it was 7.7 million in asks from jurisdictions statewide, and they had 2.5 million to award. So I think they anticipated releasing decisions by the end of last week. We still haven't heard. They assure us that word is coming soon, but I know they had a difficult decision before them as far as how to distribute those dollars. So we're hopeful for the whole 200 and could see probably that or a partial matching fund award.
Thank you for your answer.
Commissioner, 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 Commissioner,
You need to
Commissioner, you're-
unmute yourself.
Did it again. I just wanted to ask on a MISO grant and the grants from the state that as soon as those come in, I'd like to know about it and have a link that we can share with people. We've got quite a few folks that follow me on Facebook with this kind of information, and I want to make sure they have a fast opportunity to apply. You know, I've said this before. I think that the efforts that you make in business development is one of the most important things we do, because it's the seed corn of the future, and we don't want to be eating our seed corn just to balance our budget. So as we go forward, as soon as we can get back on track with the Land Bank Authority, among other things, I really would like to see us do that. You know, for all of the things that we need to do to help people, without a solid economy, we can't do it. So those investments that we make to make sure we have a solid business community are crucial for the success of Clackamas County. ISP, LBA, CLT, you know all the acronyms. Just I think that ought to be a priority going forward as funding becomes available.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we will let you and the entire board know as soon as we know about the funding from the state.
And I did note in your overall budget presentation from your department an 8.7% cut and 6 vacancies. So obviously your department is doing its part to help balance this budget.
Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, Commissioner Humberson just said something I want some clarification on. So thank you, Commissioner Humberson. So that 8.7 on page 3 towards the bottom, and then below that is 6.7. That's the FTE reduction. So earlier, Laura, you mentioned that was a grant, I think, that ended. So my question is really about administration asked for 5, 10, and 15% cuts. What percentage did your department for ongoing cost cut? Not one time, but ongoing cost. What percentage does this budget reflect? 5, 10, 15, or 0, or what number?
I don't have an exact percentage, but our budget was pretty much status quo. We did turn back $245,000 over to the general fund, which I think is in Gary's message. But we are, due to the COVID-19 and our operations being shut down, we've already issued, I think, over 150 non-work letters to staff that had to go on unemployment. So we've had a huge impact, which again is not totally reflective of our budget, because we're gonna have to go back and do supplemental budgets, but I can get more information for you on that.
Right. And I appreciate, I mean, we all hope that the COVID situation is temporary. I'm just kind of looking at our situation as a hole in the boat. And I'm just wondering what every department's doing to close that hole. So if there's nothing ongoing that's been cut that's sizable, then I understand that. But I'm just trying to figure out what every department's contributing, because I think that was the purpose of the administrator asking for 5, 10, and 15. So if you can get an answer to me, in the near future, today or tomorrow, that'd be great. But that's what I'm trying to ask every department. So anyone who's watching, that's a kind of a question I'll be asking across the board. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair Parks, I see no further hands.